This week, I got to talk with a repeat guest and a fan favorite here on the podcast, Miss ASHLEY WINSTEAD. And we got to talk about her new thriller, This Book Will Bury Me. This book was so many things. It is a really vulnerable portrayal of grief and of obsession and the things we do to get away from our grief. And also a very thorough exploration of true crime culture from someone who found herself caught up in it herself. And I personally loved the ways that ASHLEY shared her experience through this novel, talking about how you can get caught up in true crime culture and the things she started noticing along the way. But here is the synopsis for This Book Will Bury Me. After the unexpected death of her father, college student Jane Sharp longs for a distraction from her grief. She becomes obsessed with true crime, befriending armchair detectives who teach her how to hunt killers from afar. In this morbid internet underground, Jane finds friendship, purpose, and even glory. So when news of the shocking deaths of 3 college girls in Delphine, Idaho, takes the world by storm and sleuths everywhere race to solve the crimes, Jane and her friends are determined to beat them. But the case turns out to be stranger than anyone expected. Details don't add up, the police are cagey, and there seems to be more media hype and internet theorizing than actual evidence. When Jane and her sleuths take a step closer, they find that every answer only begs more questions. Something's not adding up, and they begin to suspect their killer may be smarter and more prolific than any they've faced before. Placing themselves in the center of the story starts to feel more and more like walking into a trap. Told 1 year after the astounding events that conclude the case and left the world reeling, when Jane has finally decided to break her silence about what really happened, she tells the true story of the Delphine massacres, and what she has to confess will shock even the most seasoned true crime fans. I absolutely loved this book. I flew through it, and it's not a short book, so that's saying something, but I really loved the conversation I got to have with ASHLEY about it and how personal it is to her story, both of losing her dad and of kind of losing herself in true crime culture. I feel like it was a really unique and personal take on that subject. And she also taught me about something called a romana Clef, which is a novel about real life events that is overlaid with the facade of fiction. The fictitious names in the novel represent real people, and the key is the relationship between the nonfiction and the fiction. It's basically a literary term that helps us process our non-fictional or our real world through fiction. And in some ways, if I wanted to get really picky about it, I would say like a lot of fiction does that for me and probably does that for a lot of people. But this specific version, and This Book Will Bury Me, really uses things that we have all become very comfortable hearing about and talking about with each other, and explores all kinds of different cases, all kinds of different true crime cases from that lens of like, why are we so obsessed, and what does it mean that we're so obsessed, and what should we do about the fact that we're sometimes so obsessed. So I love learning new literary terms. I'm like, cool, now I know what a romana Clef is. I've read a romana Clef. But with all that to say, let's hear more about it from ASHLEY.
Is it okay if I drink coffee while we're talking? And
Totally,
okay.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
There's kind of an ongoing joke. I mean, I'm like always bringing this into screen, and people are like, you take your hydration so seriously, so we're good with hydration over here.
Hello.
Nice.
Everyone's like, that is a small toddler that you're carrying around.
Yes,
and
it really is.
Heavy. It really
but
is.
But it's so nice to not have to fill it up all the time. Like, I drink almost 2 of them a day sometimes. We're hydrated girlies over here.
I'm on 4 a day of these. Yes, I am.
Oh, that's amazing.
I am a sea creature who somehow got banished to land, and I require like a lot of water.
Same. I am gonna say it that way now moving forward, though.
Yeah, just really freak everyone out that you're talking to.
Yes. Well, I am so excited to talk with ASHLEY WINSTEAD about This Book Will Bury Me, and it's your 3rd time on the podcast, so
yes.
We're racking those numbers up.
I know. I'm a like distinguished veteran of the podcast. I'm just gonna give
Yeah.
myself that gravitas, I guess.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you
mean,
for
I
having
guess
me.
I'm a veteran podcaster now too.
Yeah,
So
yeah, you are.
we grew through it together.
Love it.
um, well, obviously I loved this book. People know by now when they're listening to this because I've talked about it and posted about it and all the things. But
Thank
I
you for all
was
that
wondering,
support, by the way.
yeah, yeah. I was wondering, and I kind of know, but for everyone listening, was there anything different about writing this book compared to your other ones?
Oh, hugely different. Yeah, like on multiple levels. Like, I would say, so this is my first roman à clef that I've ever written, which
Mhm.
for anyone who's not like, super nerdy, just came out of your Lit 101 class. That's basically just a fictional book that is based on real life events. So
Mhm.
this is the first time I've done this for a thriller. So I'll kind of like talk about why maybe I chose to
Yeah.
do that. And it has to do with like how I came up with the idea for this book, which I talk a little bit about in my author's note. That'll be, it should be with Arc and Galleys now, but it will definitely be with the
Mhm.
finished copies of the book. But anyway, I first started to conceive of this book when I was at the Southern Voices Festival in
Mm.
Birmingham, Alabama. The
Nice.
Hoover Public Library puts this on, and it was just a really great event. And it was afterwards, we went out, a bunch of librarians and the writers who were participating. We went out to dinner at the Bonefish Grill, which was lovely. And we were all talking just all things books. And one of the librarians had a mystery book club that she was running.
Mm.
And they were tackling true crime, and there was a lot of like hunger and desire among her readers, like her library patrons, to read true crime. And so it kind of
Mm.
started this conversation about the allure of true crime and what was it about these real life stories that is so compelling to people, and is there an element of ghoulishness to it and
Mm.
exploitation to it, just like kind of just really exploring it in this conversation.
Mhm.
And it was a really interesting time for me to be having that conversation because I had recently become obsessed with true crime. Like I
Yes.
was the person that everyone was talking about.
Right.
And I didn't know, I hadn't really like done the reflection about
Mm.
why. Um, and I was in particular very obsessed with the University of Idaho
Mhm.
murder case. And like counted myself one among very, very many people who's obsessed with that case. And
Yeah.
I hadn't really like figured out why. I just knew vaguely that had something to do with the fact that my father had recently passed away. And
Mhm.
there was something about like my grief and this feeling I had after he passed, um, that I had so many questions about why him, why now, could it have been prevented, where is he now? Just like all those questions that you have when you lose someone. And I was just drawn to true crime forums, especially, and like tracking cases out of this desire to like watch and see other people solving questions
Yeah.
and providing
Mhm.
answers. So as I was sitting there at this dinner, it kind of crystallized for me. And I remember saying something to everyone, where I was like, I think it is like maybe one of the most human um,
Mm.
things you can possibly do is just need to know and be
Yes.
completely unsettled by mystery. And, like when you really start to think about it, this defines so much of human existence as like this, against all odds, regardless of the consequences, this pursuit of answers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, yeah, there are so many different answers to the question of like why we find true crime compelling. But I think at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, there's something that is so deeply threatening to us about not knowing and having to
Yeah.
sit with that mystery that it becomes like an obsession, a compulsion to
Mm-hmm.
understand why. So I started to think about and imagine after that a young woman having my exact experience of um, after losing someone being drawn to this community online that becomes a kind of found family. And obviously my main character Jane in This Book Will Bury Me, she takes it to, you know, extremes that I never did.
Yeah.
But I had I really wanted to write, especially in the first half of this book, real details, a real version of my life and my emotional investments and my obsessions, because I really wanted to talk about what was happening in my life and what I was seeing in the
Right.
world around me, at a really like specific and realistic level. So Jane and you know, warned my family, but like, this isn't a spoiler because this happens in like the first, you know, chapter of the book, but Jane loses her
Mm-hmm.
father. And that account of like how she finds out and everything and how it happens is exactly what happened to me. And
Oh,
there
wow.
was, yeah, I know. And maybe people don't want to know that. I don't actually know. But I'm it was the most cathartic
Mm.
experience I've ever had, writing
Mm-hmm.
exactly what happened and putting
Mm-hmm.
it on the page. And then the cases that Jane becomes obsessed with and very emotionally and intellectually invested in
Mm-hmm.
are fictional versions of the cases that I was really emotionally invested in and had a lot of questions about, like the Abraham
Mm.
Shakespeare case, Gabby Petito, but most of all, the University of Idaho
Mm-hmm.
cases. And so around the halfway mark, the kind of Romana Clef of the book falls away a little bit and it
Mm-hmm.
spins into a lot of different directions. Um, but there was something that was so important to me about being very honest
Mm-hmm.
and realistic as possible and
Yes.
vulnerable about putting all that on the page.
Yeah.
So sorry, Kate, I talked for like,
No, you answered so many of my questions already, which is so cool that you just like you I was like, well, of course she knows all the talking points to talk about. She wrote the book.
well, I mean, I
um
probably should. It's like, oh, this is not a monologue.
well,
So,
no, it is. That is like when it's an interview podcast, it is about you doing most of the talking. I was loving it. There were multiple things you talked about there that I think made the story really powerful. So, and I'm just trying to figure out which one I want to ask you about first.
to pull out, yeah.
Um, but there was a quote. Like I pulled a bunch of quotes because I didn't know even how many things I was gonna end up talking about. But there was a quote where Jane's getting overwhelmed by something, and she says, "I could barely make sense of it. I felt a sudden longing to go back to the black and red world of the true crime forum." I
Mhm.
loved that sentence so much. Couple things. Obviously, it's very fun. You did the black and red too instead of black and white. So like we have wordplay going on, which I always love. But as someone who, and I think it's when you were talking about like, it's a very human condition to need like answers and to be sure of things. I think also you're people who tend more anxious. Like that's like very much the core of that thing is you want to be able to have control over everything. So I
Yes.
thought it, I'm going to get through this.
Have like if I'm allowed to say, like
Yes.
the best gravelly voice right now. Like
Yes.
the best, like you sound like I can't name the celebrity, but it's like
Ooh.
amazing, like
I
really
wonder if it's
working.
Emma Stone. I feel like hers is
There's like,
gravelly.
yeah, like that slight depth and a gravel that just like it's just
Yes.
like I could listen to it forever.
Well, I'll try
Sorry.
to keep it there. um, but I, as someone who's, I just do have control issues. They never completely
Yeah.
go away, even when you've been in therapy and know how to handle them. You just know how to handle them. It doesn't mean they don't ever come up. So I loved that you used true crime as well as like a way for Jane to kind of feel like she could go somewhere where she had control.
1000%. And this is why, God, I mean, putting something on a page and putting a book out and then being able to have to talk about it with readers,
Mm-hmm.
um, is the biggest gift, because you just said that and I was like, yes, that is exactly. And I in talking about this book, I haven't said the word control yet, but that is
Mm.
exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm.
It is like a manifestation of Jane's anxiety and her desire for control. And that's what
Yeah.
true crime gives her. And that's what it was
Mm-hmm.
giving me at that
Mm-hmm.
period in my life. And
Yeah.
like, to just talk a tiny bit more about, without spoiling
Yes.
anything, but like, this book is written as a tell-all memoir, where Jane is a
Mm-hmm.
year after the events that transpired. She is um, embittered and, like, decided that she's going to finally tell everyone the truth about what happened. And she has a reason for doing this. And it's a reason that she keeps really close until the end of the book. And a lot of that even is about control. I mean, it really is. Like, I remember after my dad passed having literal thoughts like, how do I reverse this? Like,
Yeah.
how do I bring him back? Like,
Right.
I'm a grown ass woman.
Mm-hmm.
Why was I thinking that? But it's like that part of you that needs control, that
Mm-hmm.
has like ordered your world so that for the most part you can make things happen for
Mm-hmm.
yourself, and then being confronted with something that you absolutely is outside the power of your control is
Mm-hmm.
one of the most like remaking experiences I've ever had. So
Yeah.
that's what this book is about, really, at
Yes.
the core. Um,
Yeah.
Ta-da, we're done. We solved it.
The other thing that you were bringing up is you wrote it's written as kind of a tell-all,
Yeah.
and she's gotten to a point where she's like, I'm gonna say what actually happened from my side of things.
Yeah.
And when I first started reading it, it was reminding me that I remember, I can't remember which podcast, but when you did like a tour about the last housewife, you brought up the story of, and you're gonna have to tell me how to pronounce it, Scheherazade.
Scheherazade. Yep. Yeah.
Scheherazade. Okay.
Yeah.
And it always stuck with me because you brought it up as how like it's a story of a woman who's like captured by a king. I think I'm,
Hmm.
I'm
Yep.
sticking with this.
No, yeah.
Basically, she thinks he's gonna kill her, but then she starts telling him stories every night about herself, and that
Yep.
ends up keeping her alive. And I thought that was such a powerful metaphor when I heard it like 2 years ago, or not even a metaphor, whatever that is, just a story.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of what I really love about reading is that you get everyone's perspective, and it reminds you how much like if you're in someone's perspective, you actually probably are able to understand how they got where they were versus
Yeah.
like when you're outside of it. So the first chapters were reminding me of Last Housewife, or the first chapter, because it opens up as well, but it's basically then we have the fun like podcast element in that one. But it's
Yeah.
also like a really strong female who's saying like, no, hear my whole story. Here's what happened. And then this one kind of starts like that. So is there something
Yep.
about stories like that that are as appealing to you to write as they are for me to read?
Yes, no, that's such a great, and I had the same sort of feeling writing the opening to this book as I
Yeah.
did for those kind of like interstitial chapters in The Last
Hmm.
Housewife, where you have this kind of like in The Last Housewife, this disembodied voice that you're not entirely sure who's speaking to you. And that was
Hmm.
actually the first part of the book that I wrote.
Oh, that's
There's three
cool.
of them, and that was like I framed it out first and then filled
Mm.
everything in the middle. And then yeah, I had that same sort of like I was in the same frame of mind writing, and it
Yeah.
was for This Book Will Bury Me. And to be honest, I didn't start out writing This Book Will Bury Me as a tell-all memoir. Like I started
Ooh.
writing it straight, just like, okay, point A to point B. And it
Mhm.
was really dissatisfying to me. Like I wasn't feeling in the zone. I wasn't feeling like the voice was hitting. Like it
Mm.
just, my instincts were like, no, this
Yeah.
isn't. And it wasn't until I realized and I figured out that I would be right, that Jane's got to be directly talking to the reader, and that this is
Mhm.
a project basically adding like yet another meta layer. I don't know why I'm so
Yes.
obsessed with like
I
writing
same.
books about,
Mhm.
Romana Clef's about a Romana Clef told as a memoir, but secretly a different project is going on. Like, why am I like that? I don't know.
Yeah.
It makes like my outlines, I have to be like
Mm.
so insanely obsessive about the details. Um,
Mhm.
but it wasn't until I like realized that was the way I was going to tell it that the entire story cracked wide open for me.
Oh,
And
that's
all of a
so cool.
sudden, I was rewriting the whole thing. And it flowed. And I like,
Mm.
all of a sudden, I had Jane's voice on lock, and
Yeah.
she became different than I had originally
Oh,
pictured
nice.
her. Like, she was older, wiser, more bitter, a darker, like
Mm.
at the time that Jane is speaking to the reader and telling her story, she has been through the ringer,
Yeah.
right? Like she starts out, her arc is like innocence to very, very sort of like someone who has been through a lot of life and a lot of
No more
experiences.
ignorance. Yeah.
And so she is, that totally changed her voice in this book. And that was so satisfying and fun
Mm.
to write.
Yeah.
And the
But
footnotes of it all,
it
I love.
yes, those were so fun. They would be a little there were sometimes like snarky ones and sometimes they were informative. Like
Yeah.
that was super fun. And when you said it didn't start out that way, I was like, "Oh my gosh," cuz now having read the final version, like her voice is so much a part of it. And like some
Yes.
of the highlights are so fun when she's kind of like giving you an aside about like what's really happening or what was really happening. So it's such a like integral part of the book now. So that's cool that it kind of brought it all to life for you too.
That's what cracked it open. And it's so fun because when I sent the book to my editor, one of her notes was like, more footnotes, more aside. She just wanted me to like
Oh,
amp up, and I was like, okay,
that's
here we go.
amazing.
Yeah, I was like, don't threaten me with a good time, because there's
Right?
nothing I like more than like figuring out places to add, speak to the reader like in a different voice or tone, or
Yeah.
like add a fact that just totally changes what Jane has just said, in the paragraph.
Yes.
And hopefully makes the reader be like, oh no, well now I have a completely different feeling about what you just said.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's really fun as a thriller author, especially when you get to like use that technique to make your reader find your narrator more unreliable or throw doubt
Mhm.
somewhere. It's very cool.
It really is. I loved that setup. It kind of reminded me, just because I read them around the same time, of how Lane Fargo uses like a documentary script.
Yes,
Yes, like
I
they both
love
kind
it
of
in the
had that same
favorites.
feeling where you're sneaking extra info in with this like other plot device or whatever it would technically be
Yes, I love
classified
like
as.
mixed media.
Hmm.
And yeah, there's so many different techniques that you can use to bring all of these different voices in and
Yeah,
perspectives. It's so fun. Yeah, I
yeah,
love any book that is creative like that.
yes. Um, That's a good segue, because this book reminded me of The Last Housewife in the first chapter. But what reminded me of In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, one of the things I think we even talked about, however many years ago that was, four, um, was like how it was such a large ensemble cast, but like all of the characters, I felt like I knew them and like they were distinct. And so we talked about like how you did that and the way that you kind of love building the characters out and how you get to know that many characters. So this one, even though it's from Jane's perspective, very much felt like an ensemble cast again, since she does have like the true crime forum friends. So how did you go about making this ensemble cast?
Yeah, I love that question because there are some books I've written like The Last Housewife and even my previous thriller to this one, Midnight's the Darkest Hour, where they feel really like closed and claustrophobic, you know,
Mm-hmm.
in you are following one character and you're in her head the whole time. And not that that's not true of This Book Will Bury Me, but
Mm-hmm.
like the point of those books is to like tunnel in deep into one
Mm-hmm.
person, and there
Yep.
is a kind of claustrophobia to that. Whereas I really wanted with this book to like kick the world wide open and
Yeah.
like have Jane be this kind of young woman who hasn't experienced a lot of life, and through the internet, because that's kind of how we're all connecting these days, through the
Yeah.
internet, her world becomes kind of explodes and widens.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew I wanted an ensemble cast. I knew that I wanted to create a found family for Jane.
Mm-hmm.
Because what she is seeking after the loss of her dad is a kind
Mm-hmm.
of family substitute.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is my most highly, highly researched book.
Oh
Like,
wow.
I was kind of saying to you that I was already in the weeds as a true crime consumer and obsessive
Right.
before I even conceived of this book. And so then I just, I read every possible thing I could about true crime. I watched every documentary I could get my hands on that time permitted. I read
Mm-hmm.
books about how amateur sleuths do what they do, books about emerging DNA technology and how the law enforcement has tapped kind of like amateur genealogists and
Oh
other
wow.
like scientists to help them crack cold cases, and especially like Barbara Ray Ventnor's book
Mm-hmm.
about she's the woman who helped the police identify the Golden State Killer.
Yeah.
That book I highly recommend. It's fabulous. The Paul Holes book, Unmasked, just like all, and I know he's former law enforcement, so
Mm-hmm.
just all as many perspectives. I tried to learn as much as I could.
Yeah.
Um, about what life looks like as like not just a consumer of true crime like I was, a lurker in forums and and just kind of more passive but an active sleuth. But to your question about creating these characters, I was also determined to bring to life on the page the forum experience, like what it
Yes.
feels like to get to know various personalities simply through text, like this very like dry
Yes.
text in posts, and somehow, and this was actually one of my biggest craft challenges, and my editor
Okay.
and I talked about this a lot in the lead up to me writing this book. It was a question like, is this going to be compelling for readers
Mm-hmm.
to read a conversation unfolding like a forum transcript,
Right.
and we had this question kind of with the podcast in The Last Housewife too,
Mm-hmm.
because when you are relying completely on dialogue to move your book forward, that is like holding your hands behind your back, and
Yes.
it's like really limiting down your tools as a
Right.
writer, and so you have to do so much with so little, and so that
Mm-hmm.
was a really big craft challenge for me. And I hope it works and is compelling. In this book, I will leave it to readers to tell me. That's like not something I can say. With the characters with the friends that Jane finds, the fellow sleuths, she gets invited into like this elite group of amateur sleuths, like
Mm-hmm.
people who are actually really good and have a good track record.
Yes.
And so she's very honored to get pulled into this like A-team. And
Yes.
there are four other sleuths, and I had so much fun coming up
Mhm.
with their personalities, their
Mhm.
personas, their backstories, and I really wanted to reflect like the archetypes that you see in forums, like
Yes.
that kind of real experience. And so you have um Lord Goku, who is like kind of your, when you think of like a forum dweller, that's kind of like, he's that stereotype of like, he lives in his basement, he's
That's
a
what I was saying. You
young
feel like he's in a
man, yeah,
basement.
he's
Yeah.
really into anime and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. But of course, he has layers. Like, it turns out he owns the house that he's living in the basement, and he's like a big tech
Right.
guy and all these other layers. And, he and Jane become really close. And then there's Sleuth Mistress, otherwise known as Mistress, and she is a grandmother and a retired librarian who like knits by day and solves grisly murders
Yes.
by night.
I
And
love her.
Lightly, I love her so much.
Mhm.
Lightly is the retired detective who, is now doing, and he has like this, he's the moral compass of the group and like the
Right.
center. And then there's Citizen Knight, who is, military. He's part of the Navy.
Mhm.
And he is, I got to play with all of their usernames too. So
Yeah.
he's Citizen Knight with an N, but obviously Knight with a K is like a big part of how he views himself. And
Yes.
so getting to just reflect a lot of those voices that you see in forums
Mhm.
was really fun. And then I also got to kind of, you and I talked about this a little bit over DMs, but
Mhm.
kind of got to use their backstories and why they each felt
Yes.
they were drawn to true crime as insight for the
Mhm.
reader into like
Yes.
their character. So that was really fun too.
Yeah, that was gonna be the next thing I was gonna ask about. So you use something from, where did it go? It's just, from a book called Savage Appetites by Rachel Monroe. Um
Obsessed,
and
yes, with
so
that book.
there's the detective type, the defender, the victim, and then the killer, because sometimes
Yep.
killers lurk there too. But yeah, I did DM you while I was reading it, because then like what you kind of do, in a global non-spoilery sense, is like there's who Jane thinks each person probably is because of just like her amount of knowledge, and then there's like what she starts to think maybe is different about them as she gets to know them. So like you get to like go through the like character development with multiple different characters while using like true crime terminology, essentially. I thought it
Yeah.
was so cool.
Thank you. So for like if you haven't read Savage Appetite, by the way,
I
you
added it to my TBR now.
it
Yeah.
is, it's fabulous. I love this I love this book by Rachel Monroe. It's nonfiction. It is a book about why women in particular are
Mm,
drawn to true crime.
mm,
And so she takes like real life cases and she
mm.
poses all of these different kinds of personalities, and suggests using real life cases to suggest why, show different ways of being attracted to true crime. And so to add another, I thought it was so smart. And to add another layer of meta to this book, I thought, well,
Yes,
Mistress, who is a librarian and incredibly well read, would have read Rachel Monroe's Savage Appetites, and
you're
for and
right.
yep, and she would be as obsessed with it as I am, and
Yes,
and to her, she would use those archetypes that Monroe comes up with as her like version of Enneagram. It's
yes,
her like, so
exactly.
like, and so even though she's always asking the other sleuths who are part of her like little found family, sleuth family,
Yeah,
to like, well, are you a detective? Are you a defender? Are you a victim type? And she's wanting them to
yeah,
self-diagnose because she wants to get to know, her like children
yes,
and her friends. Um,
yeah,
and it was so fun to have the characters all misdiagnose themselves in the
yes,
beginning. and then throughout the course of the book have Jane slowly come to realize, like, oh, Goku said that he's a detective type because he's really just interested in the puzzle of solving
Mm-hmm.
cases. But I think he's not giving himself this kind of credit, or I think
Mm-hmm.
that something else is really going on now that I know
Mm-hmm.
him better. So
Yeah.
it was a really unique way to kind of come at getting to know these characters. I really
Yeah.
enjoy.
And as you were explaining, it was also reminding me too, like, I really like in stories when it touches on, like, it reminds us that we contain multitudes, like we're not just one thing. So
Yeah.
like we also don't even have to label ourselves one thing either. But as someone who like wants to know everyone's personality test when they come into my life, I can't say that I always remember it.
Yeah. Well, any tool for like introspection or reflection,
Yeah,
I
it's
think,
what we talk. Yeah,
it's not the end all be all, but it gives you like an entrance point to think
exactly. And it helps you like
about.
have a shorthand. Sometimes if we're trying to like explain someone that we met, like Tyler and I are trying to explain someone we met to each other, it's just like easy to have a couple like surface level things to say.
Oh yeah, you're like,
We
oh,
can
they're such
list.
a type two, and you're like,
Yes.
oh, okay,
Yeah,
that makes
exactly.
sense.
Did you ever go back and forth on how many people you wanted in like the core group, and how did you decide on
Yeah.
five total?
Yeah. I did go back and forth a little bit. The core group came very organically,
Oh,
and
nice.
I modeled it after a family, like a nuclear family.
Oh, yeah.
So mom, dad, brother, and kind of, not to be spoilery, but love interest.
Yeah, right.
So that is very much like it's just a little nuclear family. So it's like the weirdest version of a nuclear family, like a crime solving, murder solving little, homey family that they've got on the internet.
That is such a cool concept that you kind of did like the family. That makes
Yeah.
sense too, because it's like what she is
What
replacing as
she's
well.
hurting for. Yep, it's what
Mhm.
she's searching for, other than control and, like you
Right.
said, the layers of it. And yeah, so creating that family for her. But one thing that was hard is constantly having to like slap my own hand because I was giving like too much time and airspace to some of the other characters in the forum.
Oh, yeah.
Like there are some of them that are there for, comic relief and are, just like jerks or, um, or just,
Right.
like,
To show like the satire of it all, we had to
right, or
include
very
some other
satirical
people.
characters. And I had maybe a little bit too much fun writing them in some cases, and I was like, trim this, God, kill your
Ah,
darlings. He's making you laugh, but
I
like
know.
Seattle, whatever, shouldn't have this much airtime.
Right.
Next thing you know, you're just gonna be writing about him. So that
Yeah.
part was keeping it contained and balanced,
Mhm.
was a challenge with some of the other
Yeah,
characters.
I wanted to interrupt this episode really quickly. I have a goal of monetizing Bookwild, but I would love to do it without having to have ads in the podcast. And one way that I can do that is through my Patreon community. For those who don't know, Patreon is a community platform that allows creators to share what they're creating behind a paywall. And so that means exclusive content or early releases. The Bookwild Patreon has two tiers. The first tier is the bookish tier, and at that tier you get all of the episodes out a day early, and you get access to our private community chat where we can talk about anything book related or TV shows or movies. The second tier is the Bookwild tier, and it includes everything from the first tier but also Bookwild's backlist book club. So this year I've been wanting to also still read more backlist, even though I read plenty of arcs, and Bookwild's Backlist Book Club felt like the perfect way to do that. We meet on Sundays. We are international right now, so Sundays are the best way to do it. And we meet on Zoom and we all pick a book and we talk about it, and then we talk about everything else we read during the month, and then we pick another book for the next month. So it's been so much fun so far, and we'd love to have you join the book club. So if you'd like to support the Bookwild podcast, you can go to the Patreon link in the show notes, and you can sign up for whichever tier interests you. And if you're looking for a free way to support the show, if you can like and review it on whichever platform you listen to, that helps so much. The other thing I thought was cool is you like allowed different like manifestations of grief. So like her mom is just like catatonic and doesn't want to go near any of his things, and is kind of just, I mean, she's fawning essentially for doing like fight, flight, or fawn. So she's just like, that's how she can handle it for now. And then Jane is like, has like a really insatiable need to know more about her dad, and to be closer to him and to find out what she can know about him, and is like, she's not dissociating from her pain essentially.
Right. Yeah.
Not in the way that her mom is. So what was that like how did you kind of decide to build their relationship? Because I feel like it also, especially by the end, it gave room for the fact that both reactions are okay. We just all like sometimes do different stuff.
Yeah, that really is more of the Ramona Clef coming in, where everyone in my family had very different reactions and manifestations of grief. And I have spent a lot of time just thinking about how different they all are. And I'm sure this, if you asked my siblings, because I'm the oldest of four, and if you asked my siblings and asked my mom, they would probably say the exact same thing. But sometimes it can be painful to see people grieving differently than you are. And because it feels, in some instances, you think to yourself like, oh, are they not hit as hard as I am? Or, oh, does this, since they're not grieving in the same way, does this mean that, like, I don't know, just all these questions,
Or
like,
like, am I doing it wrong if other
am I
people are
doing it
doing
wrong?
it differently?
And in some cases, it's like, the question is, yeah, am I grieving more shallowly than, or am I, yeah, just like the different ways that grief manifests, it like compounds, because you're not only struggling with all of these feelings, but you're struggling looking at yourself struggle with all these feelings. So there's this obviously I'm obsessed with the poet Richard Steichen. And I think I've talked about this like on my Instagram or something before. But he has this poem in his collection War of the Foxes, where he writes about grief. And I'm gonna totally butcher this line, but I'm gonna say it anyway.
Yes.
Where it's like, one day you are falling to the floor in grief, falling to your knees on the floor with grief, and the next, a little bit later, you are falling to your floor on your knees in grief and noticing the paint chips in the in on the, like, on the wall, and then wondering about how in your grief you could be noticing the paint chips. And it's just like this, both talking about like the evolution of grief and how you slowly like come out of it, but also about like when you're an anxious person or a person who is really used to being self-aware because maybe you've had a lot of therapy in your life, or you're a writer or a reader and that's how your brain works.
Right.
Just the weirdness of like disassociating and seeing yourself grieve, and then having thoughts about that,
Yes.
and like judgments or critiques or and so I think trying to capture that in the book through Jane and her mom's very different approaches to grief and their conflict, the conflict that those their different approaches brings to a head for them, I think was really important to me. And I did have to, so that I just, is one of those things that was important to me to write realistically from my own experience.
Yeah. I feel like it would make sense to ask this at some point. But if it's too personal, let me know. But when you
Oh
were
no.
saying writing from your experience, I
Yeah.
also wondered, because as Jane is like doing research or being in the forum, sometimes she'll like find something and she'll be like, ooh, and then she talks out loud to her dad's ashes. And it
Yeah.
kind of feels like she's like doing it with him still. Was that, is it meta
Totally.
enough that you talked to your dad while you were writing this book?
Absolutely. Like everything, it is so close. And I think if you write a book like this,
Hmm.
I don't think there is like a too personal, because I have made it personal, like that's,
Right.
and everything that Jane does, like carry her dad's ashes around with her, build a
Yeah.
shrine of his things. Even the items in the shrine are those are my shrine items,
Okay.
for
Yeah.
my father.
Yeah.
And those were, I wanted to write about how weird it is to suddenly be handed a plastic bag full of someone you love's ashes.
Right.
Like, holy shit. The
Mhm.
the grotesque intimacy of
Mhm.
that. And
Yeah.
like the real questions that you're grappling with as you're holding this bag of ashes, like what part of the person I love am I holding? And
Right.
what does it mean to be holding, and is this the like grossest, most horrible thing that's ever happened to me?
Mm.
Yes, but then the weird turnaround you do where you think to yourself like, "Oh my God, I have them again.
Right. Mhm.
Oh my God, I never want to part, and I never want to be apart from this physical part of this
Representation.
person."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so just like I don't I think as like people, as thriller and crime writers, we often write about grief and murder and bodies in this very abstract or distanced way. And I
Desensitized.
understand,
Yeah.
yeah, I
Mhm.
understand why, because it's like it's easier, I don't want to say the wrong thing, but
Mhm.
it's easier to write a book that is an entertaining book if you
Mm.
don't have to really confront some of the grislier truths about death.
Yes.
Um, and so I didn't want to do that with this book. Like, I
Mhm.
wanted to look ugly truths in the face.
Right.
And I wanted to be as real as possible about
Mhm.
death. And I'm really making anyone who doesn't want to confront any of this, like, this definitely, I'm not really like selling this book to
No.
them, but that's probably a good
Well,
thing.
that's okay. If
um
they're in a fragile place, it's probably not the
yeah,
right one to read
yeah,
right now.
yeah, no, totally.
Yeah.
But it is, yeah, I wanted to like
Yes.
be very honest.
Yeah.
And even if that requires me to go to a vulnerable place, to a self-critical place,
Mhm.
um, all of those things are in this
Mhm.
book. Um,
Yes, I would agree.
so, and I
Yeah.
think the messages that I've gotten from readers who have felt solidarity and seen by those parts of the book mean a lot to me.
I
Uh,
bet.
so,
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Um it also, as you're saying, there's like uh we also like learn about Jane's relationship with her dad a little bit too, and how like he picked her name because she's Janeway Sharp, yes.
Yeah,
All
her
of a sudden
last name.
Sharp sounded wrong. But named after a Star Trek character,
Yeah.
which you do a really cool story thing with at the end too, but I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to tell people she uses it in a cool way.
Yeah.
But there were also like I had something highlighted about like that you watched, or I watched every episode with him, but I preferred magic to sci-fi. And I know that when I talked to you the first time, I think you said the first book you ever wrote was fantasy or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yep.
So all of a sudden I was like, is this self-referential too? So was Star
Yeah.
Trek important to you and your dad as well?
Yeah, my dad was a huge Trekkie.
Oh,
Yeah, he wasn't on the forums, and
yeah,
to my knowledge, did not write fanfic.
yeah,
But, you know, one of the things that I discovered and Jane discovers is that you're never done learning about the people that you love, even after you lose them. So who
right.
knows?
Hmm.
But yeah, that was, my dad was a big Trekkie. He was really, really big into sci-fi and
Mm,
fantasy, you know, and 80s rock music and just like all these
yeah,
things that he loved that he gave that I loved because I loved them through him and because they were a shared experience. And
right.
another author, Josh Moling, was asked me on Instagram like, "Are you a Trekkie? Like, how did this part of the book weave in there?" And I was like, no, I literally just everything of Star Trek I've ever seen, which is actually a lot by now, is just
Right.
like over my dad's shoulder kind of thing. Like walking
Hmm.
in and out of a room while he was watching the episode,
Yes.
or sitting at his feet while he was watching an episode, or
Yeah.
stealing pieces of popcorn from his popcorn bowl while he was, you know, just like those sorts of experiences and being exposed to it that way, and then
Hmm.
coming to have an appreciation for it after he
Hmm.
passed and think about why he loved it
Hmm.
and kind of, you know, get that insight about the person you love. Like doing the detective work
Yeah.
about someone you love
Hmm.
after they're when they're missing and you no longer have them. It was
Yeah.
like in this book and in my life is like an act of love,
Mm.
as much as it is an act of like control and a manifestation of anxiety, you know, and
Right.
grief. It's all
Yes,
those things
everything's all
together.
mixed together.
Yeah, it's
Yes,
all mixed together, which makes it, you know,
it
confusing.
is.
But
Yeah. It also had me thinking about, and I can't remember if it was in like Dreams or Housewife as well, but Midnight is the Darkest Hour, obviously. There's like Twilight references.
yeah,
And she really processes even like her real world kind of through the fictional world that kind of like
yes,
helps her. And it just like sometimes characters feel like friends is also kind of where I'm kind of where I'm headed with this. And so then there were a few references in here, whether it was like Star Trek or I think there was even Clueless. If you fit a bunch in there,
Heather's,
um,
Buffy.
there, yes,
Yeah.
I was like, I know I had more highlights. I didn't
Yeah.
write them all out.
I was doing that where my lore started trend before it became a trend
Yes, you
by via this
were.
book.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. That is that's so true. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
But like I have been like that kind of my whole life. Like I really sometimes I do get really obviously however many years into this podcast, sometimes I get really into certain characters or stories and you feel really connected and it helps you understand yourself, might help you
Yeah.
understand other people more. But is that like now that I'm kind of seeing it in a couple of your books, is that a similar experience for you?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I am trying to work out across various books of mine, um, is the difference, is actually like articulating the difference between a character in a book that becomes a friend and a thought partner, maybe someone you model your life and your actions on, even like an
Mhm.
inspiration, versus a person on the screen who you communicate with but you've never met in real life. You see, you
Mhm.
know, 2D visual of them.
Exactly.
You
Yes.
trust that that is who they are,
Yep.
and you get their messages. And so that for
Mhm.
Jane is her true crime family, just these 2D
Yes.
images with words and thoughts attached. And a person who has passed away who was once physically present but now
Mhm.
exists only in the traces that they've left behind, notes,
Mhm.
you know, photos, videos.
Mhm.
And so trying to kind of like articulate the sameness and difference of all of these different like influential figures in a person's life that really are just stories, like at a
Mm-hmm.
certain point. And like, I think other authors have said this and done this um, a lot better than me. But just to paraphrase, like this idea that after we pass, all we become is memory and story. There
Mm-hmm.
is nothing left. Like we all transmute from physical being into story.
Yeah.
Um, and so trying to think about the ways that for Jane, both like books and story are that, and her true crime friends, her sleuths, and like the internet is a way to like people are even before they're dead have transmute are just like living stories, but
Yeah.
then her dad has already done this, and so for her they all have equal weight and meaning and influence, and that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a coping mechanism where she's able to like think about her dad and say like, okay, well he's just gone into this realm where all these other people I love are,
Mm-hmm.
and that's okay. I can live with that. Like I
Yeah.
still have him the same way I have Mistress and Goku and Lightly for the most part. Obviously, I won't reveal any spoilers, but
Right.
they don't always just live on the screen for her.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that becomes, I think that's something that I've been trying to like work out and articulate for myself
Yeah.
across various books. And maybe this is like
Yeah.
where This Book Will Bury Me is like where it comes to a head and I like discover for myself why this question is so interesting to me. Um,
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so
sorry.
obsessed with parasocial relationships, so I'm
Yes.
right there with you.
Yes.
It's fascinating to me because like a lot of things, I think there are good versions of it and there are bad versions of it. But like some people only think of the bad and I'm like there's also really good things that like I found health solutions in the last year through
Yeah.
parasocial podcast relationships that doctors couldn't help me find. Like
Yep.
sometimes you get really good stuff from it. Sometimes you're just hearing someone else say something and you're like, oh, I'm not the only one who's ever felt that way or been that scared. And then obviously there's unhealthy versions of it, but I'm so fascinated by it. And I think we can do it with like fictional characters too.
1000%. No, you're exactly right. That's the perfect word is this pair is that it's this
Mm-hmm.
parasocial relationship. And like I think as parasocial relationships increasingly become a bigger part of all of our
Right.
lives, I just think that this question becomes all the more like vital and
Yeah.
important. And I completely agree. Like everything in life, it has
Mm-hmm.
its like downsides and its incredible upsides.
Mm-hmm.
And I in a book called Future Saints, which will be out yeah, in 2026,
Yeah.
I'm thinking about this too in really less around, well, a little bit around death,
Mm-hmm.
but more about like a woman who all of a sudden has a lot of fans
Yeah.
and who had developed all these parasocial relationships with her,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a book about a woman ascending into stardom in the
Mm-hmm.
music business, and the like I start to refer to it as like ghosts on the internet who are
Mm.
haunting her. And so yeah, all of this is like because it's like this parasocial relationship where they're talking amongst themselves and saying like, I have this one-sided relationship with Hannah, the main
Uh-huh.
character, the musician, where she has helped me understand grief and grieve for my
Right.
like mother, and yet she doesn't know I exist, and I've like cut my hair to look exactly and dyed it to look like hers and all these other
Exactly.
things, and it's like, is this healthy? Is
I
this,
know.
just like all those questions that
Yes.
this like, what does it mean that this woman means so much to me and she has no clue who I am and never will? Um,
And like at mass, like
oh
so
yes.
many people have a one-sided relationship with her. Like that's the other what definitely kicked it off for me was when the Eras tour started happening. Like that was
Mm,
2 years ago, I think, when it started happening.
yeah.
And I like knew some of her music, but this was also still mostly my return to her since I was a teenager, I guess is the best way to say
Yeah.
it. I was never like, oh, I hate her, just so no one comes for me.
Yeah.
But I didn't know all the lore, which is kind
Yeah.
of what you're talking about here. And then she also Easter eggs. So I've also always said I think I got so drawn. It's like being a thriller fan in some ways. You're like, oh, what clue am I
Absolutely.
missing? And how many things can I learn? And I need answers to everything.
Yes.
And I got so fascinated by that. And so like some of my fandom of Taylor Swift is my fascination with like the fact that she figured out how to amass that much attention, and the
Yeah.
fact that there's music of hers that has helped me be like, oh my god, like she just says that I'm not alone in this, says the right thing in a song and you're like, wow, that made me process it. But she doesn't know anything about me, not
Yeah.
a single thing. And there was this book I was reading called Everybody Knows by Jordan Harper. Shout out Hallie Sutton, recommended that one
I've
to me.
heard, I was going to say, I probably from Hallie, but I've
Yes.
heard so many great things about that book.
Yeah, it's really good. It's a really, really good LA noir, but there's like this sentence where the main character, who's kind of like a PR fixer essentially,
Mhm.
is on set, and she kind of like turns around and then it's like Ryan Gosling walks by me and then she's like, and then I'm reminded how strange an experience it is to like see a celebrity whose face I've seen more images and frames of than my closest friends.
Yep.
And I was like, my mind was like blown because I was like, that's exactly what it is. Like, even the people I'm closest to, I've seen more photos of, even like probably like someone I'm not a total fan of, but like just because they're a celebrity, I've seen more of their face. So it is
Yes.
just, it's wild the way that we can have different relationships.
And what happens, like this book will bury me, is very interested in the question, what happens when you have a parasocial relationship with dead people,
Yeah.
with
The victim.
murdered,
Yeah.
with the victims, and with their families, and with just like the people involved in the case? Like, what happens when you have this extremely intense parasocial emotional relationship to a case and the victims at the heart of it?
Right.
um
Yeah.
and both the like the beauty of emotionally investing in strangers and
Mhm.
feeling a desire to find justice for them,
Mhm.
and the creepiness of having a parasocial relationship with strangers and who have died,
Right.
and feeling a sense of ownership over them and possessiveness over them.
Right.
And just so all the true crime fans who may be listening to this don't like totally freak out and get offended, like
Right.
I that was that's a critique levied at myself also
Right.
as a consumer of true crime. So
Mhm.
if I am wrestling with these questions, which I certainly am in this book, I'm
Right.
wrestling, they're like personally directed as much as they
Right.
are directed outside. So,
Mhm.
um,
Well, all of that together, what you just said, I was gonna mention, because what you're saying, being able to even be connected to someone that much who's not alive, was reminding me. There's a part in the book where she says, "My mom used to say I was overly attuned to people, as if I
mhm,
were a radio receiver stuck on the wrong channel." And I was
yes.
like, oh my God. I was like, well, now I know what I'm going to call my like hyper empathy, since everyone says they have empathy. I'm like, I'm just going to call myself overly attuned instead of being like, I'm
Overly
such an
attuned.
empath. But I feel like that's even prevalent in your other stories as well, as what also
Yeah.
kind of came up for me. I feel like you're not afraid to like talk about like being, your characters tend to be people who are very sensitive even though they have like their own experiences and plots, and that's can be such an overwhelming feeling to have, the way to live through the world that way. Is that coming from personal experience?
It will not surprise you to hear that yes, indeed, it is coming like so
Yeah.
much in this book. That is coming from personal experience, and
Hmm.
that is the reality of my life and always has been. And I think,
Yeah.
I really do think that so much of what draws people to books, both reading and writing them,
Mhm.
is having like being very attuned people will say,
Yes.
um
Yes.
and wanting to find an outlet for that or like a safe space for that. So writing is
Mhm.
how I deal with it and process that. And
Mhm.
reading is also how I deal with and
Yes.
process that. And I like to write about, like you said, characters that share that sensibility and are
Mhm.
struggling with it,
Right.
because that helps me process myself. I remember being, I want to say like 8 or 9 years old, and
Mhm.
I had this habit when I was a young kid of just really, really over investing in my friendships
Okay.
and like being obsessed with my friends
Yeah.
and just wanting to do anything for them or talk about them 24/7,
Mhm.
and having a consistent pattern where my friends were just not that into me. Like
Oh.
no, but it was okay. They were
Yeah.
normal.
I know. I
They
know.
were I guess I hate the word normal. They
I
were
know.
average
Yes.
invested. Like they
Yes.
were perfectly fine. They
Yes.
just weren't matching me at 150%.
Right.
And I remember like having the emotional come down and the
Mhm.
sadness, and my mom kind of at one point, bless her, sat me down and was like, Ashley, you are either, this is who you are. I need you to just
Oh.
accept this about yourself. And you're either going to have one or two experiences. You're going to go through life investing in people because you can't help it. Like, you can't
Mm-mm.
help being this kind of person, an empath or overly attuned or too invested,
Mhm.
whatever you want to call it. And you're just going to be constantly disappointed when people don't reciprocate, or, and I hope that you choose this other path, you
Yeah.
are going to know this about yourself,
Yep.
know that you're going to do this,
Mhm.
and walk away hands off and
Yeah.
like let that be, and not need people to reciprocate and
Right.
understand that they're not going to do it. And you're just going to continue doing it because that's who you are and that's what makes you happy. And you're not going to need the the return. And
Mhm.
so that changed me forever.
I
And
bet. That's
yeah,
wise.
I mean, it's so wise, right? And I think at
Yeah.
like 8 or 9 years old, it definitely took me a while to like fully to
Oh,
come to
yeah.
grips with what that meant. And then choosing a career as a writer and has been like a whole new learning about it, because in some ways you could view being a writer as putting 150% of yourself into this book package that you then
Right.
put out into the world, and you're hoping people are going to reciprocate with love, and like it's going to resonate and people
Yes.
are going to really enjoy it. But you have to learn to be okay with people disliking it, hating it, feeling
Mhm.
very meh or apathetic about it. You have
Right.
to be okay with
Yes.
en masse
Yeah.
that, not the lack of reciprocation. So I
Yeah.
think I like actually came up with a good emotional building block for my future career, not even realizing it,
Yes.
learning to like let go of
Yeah.
the reactions that people have to who I am and what I do. Um,
Let them. Let them have whatever
yeah,
reaction they
right.
want.
I know. I need to read that book.
I
That's like
know.
all
Everyone's
over the
talking
bestsellers.
about it.
Yeah, the let them theory. Oh, no
I'm
wonder
like,
my mom loves
sorry
that book
guys,
so
I'm
much.
reading my thrillers.
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah. I do it just can be overwhelming when you feel big feelings and they're just big. I was trying to think of Pete Holmes is he's a comedian and has a really cool kind of like philosophical-ish podcast.
Hmm.
And he sometimes talks about how like how it can feel so scary to be so open-hearted sometimes to the world, because then all of a sudden you are feeling like deep sadness for like everyone who's like life isn't great, or like it can be so intimidating to like stay open-hearted sometimes
Yeah.
because there's also so much pain, but that like it's where you also connect with people. And I've always just like resonated with the way he describes like sometimes having it completely open is just so overwhelming. And so then you do
Yes.
have to, and I think you just mentioned this, but if you're in therapy, that's typically where you get to learn like boundaries, and then
Mm-hmm.
you learn, I finally did too. You do learn that you can be like, this is where I end and this is where you begin, and then you just have to like convince yourself like, actually mentally I don't have to absorb everyone's feelings even though I'm like
Yeah.
noticing them. But it takes time and
Yeah.
it's hard.
It is so hard, and again, I imagine this is true for Pete Holmes if he's a comedian, like,
Mhm.
and you know, you're putting your podcast out there, you're creating things and putting it out there. It's
Mhm.
like you not only have to do that kind of like interpersonal boundary setting with the people in your life, but
Mhm.
when you are a creator putting something out in the world, you have to convince yourself that people's reactions to what you've put out in the world, that you don't have to like take that in, own that,
Mhm.
you know, like that also, you have to draw a boundary there. And
Yeah.
that's really hard too when you're a creator, because you're like, well, part of why I'm even writing this is to have a conversation with you.
Right.
And so it's a conversation with you, capital U, like all
Plural.
of you,
Yeah.
everyone, the many various readers. And so just it requires just constant navigation and reminding yourself and reestablishing boundaries.
Mhm.
And I think all these questions, just to bring it back to true crime, are so
Mhm.
relevant in the true crime space. Like
Yes.
the lack of boundaries is like one of the hallmarks
Mhm.
of modern true crime. And
Yes.
like the thing that was interesting me so much about the University of Idaho case was like
Mhm.
the absolute lack of boundaries that that sleuths and true crime consumers
Mhm.
felt around the case.
Mhm.
Like not only did they feel a sense of possessiveness, um but they felt like people descended into the small town where the
Right.
crimes happened, and you know, went in person to the bar and like some of the important parts of like the victims where they were seen last and were doing their own interrogations, and journalists were writing about it and describing it as like this new phase of true crime where people are like stepping through the screens into
Mhm.
really just like physically inserting them in these stories. And
Yeah.
so that was really fascinating to me, and that's why I wanted to write, yet another reason why I wanted to write about Idaho specifically, is
Mhm.
because it was this like kind of watershed, it is this watershed moment,
Mhm.
building on, of course, like the Gabby Petito case,
Mhm.
where just received such an outsized, huge amount of attention and people
Right.
really investing. But just yeah, the like, what is it? What does the future of true crime look like
Mhm.
if people are growing more and more comfortable, you know, actually showing up in person? And
Right.
so just wrestling with all those questions and like, where does that, like, is the lack of boundaries the future? What
Mhm.
is that bad? Like, I come at everything with, I hope, an
Right.
academic's curiosity and
Mhm.
open-mindedness, where I'm not coming in with a preformed idea on any subject that I'm interested in. I'm not coming in saying like, oh, all sleuths, you know, are doing something bad or whatever, or
Mhm.
true crime is absolutely de facto exploitative.
Right.
Like I think that there is so much nuance and like we were
Yes.
saying, beauty and goodness in the true crime complex.
Right.
But I also think that there are just so many questions still to be answered about it.
Right.
And I'm asking these questions as I'm participating in it with
In
this book
fiction. But
in fiction.
also, I'd love to
Yes.
point out that also
Yeah.
like you're writing fiction.
Yeah.
I just felt like saying that.
Yeah. I don't know why. Yeah. No, yeah. Um,
um
yeah.
what you were just talking about kind of reminds me because it is there's it's a tricky conversation because I love a vigilante in a story, like love it, but I
Mhm.
fundamentally understand we can't just have a bunch of vigilantes running around either. Like that
Yeah.
doesn't solve the overall problem either, that like some of humanity is evil. Like it's like you can't do both, but then I love the story. So
Exactly.
it was also making me think, or I love vigilante and revenge stories. I just love revenge stories, really.
Yeah.
But it was making me think of how Jordy's book club, I think, was he the one who said it was kind of, this book was kind of like Don't Fuck with Cats meets
Yes,
something
yes,
else.
it is.
And I read
Can
that
I just
before I
say,
read
like,
the
he's
book.
always so brilliant
Yes.
at, like, I feel like every time he says a tagline about one of my books,
Hmm.
it becomes like my new marketing copy because he's
Yeah.
just so good at that.
Yeah.
Bless you, Jordy. Thank you, Jordy.
Yeah. Well, and then what that made me think about is we all think of those internet sleuths as like heroes. Like
1000%. Yeah.
no one's gonna be like, we're all okay with that because of like the outcome. Like is that what it is? Like because of the outcome and because
Yeah.
it was different than like a mass murder. I don't know why we're all very like, no one is complaining about them. Like that's like the
Right.
positive version. And at least my experience when I read your book, I don't have complaints about Jane. I'll just say that to not have spoilers.
Yeah.
I won't say I don't have complaints about anyone, I guess, as a character. But it's so interesting how we pick and choose like which ones we're okay with. So I agree. I feel like it's perfectly okay to have that conversation, especially in
Yeah.
fiction.
Part of the reason why I think Jane might come across as a little more palatable is, well, it's because she A does have a moral compass that she
Hmm.
tries really hard to stick to.
Yeah.
And B, she um is very forthright about her shortcomings.
Yeah.
Like, she is going to be in this memoir, going to be the first person to tell you like where she messed up and what she
Yeah.
regrets and
Hmm.
what she, you know, like the fact that she's going to be the first person to show you her flaws,
Yeah.
and to reveal, like, be like, yeah, I'm an unreliable narrator, which ironically then turns around and makes her like a much more trustworthy person.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Because she's not
so
hiding anything from us. She's like,
yes.
it's like how being around someone who's self-aware is, even if they have annoying habits, it's still better if they're self-aware than if they're not
Yeah.
aware of it. And you're like, oh God.
Yeah, you're like, oh, that is a glaring blind spot for you. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
How to
yeah.
navigate this. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, but it's interesting the way we choose which stories
I know.
are okay.
And which, when people doing the exact same things, when they're
Hmm.
heroic and when they're exploitative and
Totally.
villainous. Um, and sadly, a lot of it is arbitrary. Like, a lot of it's just like vibes, you know?
Uh-huh.
Like,
Yeah, you're right.
yeah. Or, everyone should, by the way, if you're listening and you need a recommendation for a documentary,
Hmm.
watch Don't F with Cats. Um,
Yes,
and I guess we can curse on this
you
podcast.
can. You can. You don't
I'm
have
so
to,
used
but
to
you can.
censoring I'm so used to censoring myself for
Yeah.
like, but but I will also say, like, if you are an animal lover, like, I'm sure everyone in the world, I had to fast forward through
I'm
parts
sure.
of that
Hmm.
documentary, because I simply can't. And even fast forwarding through it, there are parts of it that will haunt me until my
I
dying
could
day.
only read about it, and I'm even allergic to cats, but I was like, I can only read about this one.
Yep. Yep. No, that's a really compelling documentary, but it is
Hmm.
rough.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it is. Well, I know you read a bunch too. Have
yeah.
you read anything recently that you loved?
Oh, everything.
Yeah.
I'm really, really lucky because all the books that I get asked to blurb are like the books that would be on my TBR anyway. So,
Yeah.
I'm reading back through the Finley Donovan series right
Oh
now
yeah.
because I'm going to be talking to Elle Casamano,
Mm.
later in March about her latest, Finley Donovan digs her own grave. So I'm just having so much fun revisiting the series.
Yeah.
to kind of get to that next book. So that's super fun.
Mhm.
We're all obsessed with The Favorites by Lane Fargo.
Yes.
All of the world, all of America, as we
Mhm.
rightfully should be. Lane is amazing.
She's the
So
best.
that's like every time someone asks me for a book rec these days, I'm like, The Favorites, you know?
Yes,
It's
no
just
matter
like,
what genre you like,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Easy
Mhm.
peasy. Um, and I have read, I have a ton of debuts on my to read list. I loved Saltwater by Katie
I'm reading that right
Hayes.
now. I love it so far.
So good. That's
Mhm.
she's one of my pub day twins. Her book is also
Yes.
coming out March 25th. I really need to read Hannah Morrissey's Unlucky Ones, which will
Me
also
too,
be
that's
out.
next for me.
Yep, love her Black Harbor series.
Yeah,
So there's just it's an embarrassment of riches, like this
I know.
2025, this publishing season.
Yeah,
Um, there's just so much greatness out there.
there is.
Um,
Yeah, we
so
just well, we're recording this a month ahead of time. But we just did our like spring 2025 thrillers episode and I'm like there's so many I want to read, but I said I was going to read Backlist too.
I know. I know. It is hard. It is hard, especially because I'm sure as a like influencer and reviewer, you have it constantly piling up
Yeah.
TBR.
Yeah.
And it's the exact same way with being like a blurber,
Blurbing.
where
Yeah.
you constantly have to be like, it's like, okay, well, all right, I've just finished this book, blurbed it, sweet. Now I'm going to get to this book from a
I
year
know.
ago that I really wanted to read and has been like
Yes.
sitting on my bedside table. And then it's like another request comes in. You're like, okay,
I
we'll just put
know.
it to the side again. But I'm sure it's the exact same way with like
Yeah.
book reviewers, the Bookstagram community.
I know. Cause it'll be like, it will be like that sometimes where like I'll have been requesting books on NetGalley for a few months and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, in May, I already have 10 books. So I need to stop. But then someone sends me like, if Severance were a book, and then I'm like, oh, well, I have to request it.
Yeah, I literally cannot say no to this.
I
So,
guess I'm just gonna have 11 books in May.
can I tell you something very sacrilegious?
Yes,
I do not like Severance.
that's okay. It's not for everyone.
Oh, I
I'm
want
okay
to
with that.
like it.
I
I
know.
want to like
This is
it.
how I felt about Here's My Sacrilegious, which I've said
Yeah.
it already. But I didn't like Honora. And
Oh,
everyone loved Honora, and I felt the exact
I
same way. I
loved
was like,
Nora.
I
Yeah.
want to love this. I'm supposed to love this. And I was just like,
Yes.
I'm so bored.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. That's how I feel about Severance. I'm like,
Right. And I completely understand how it
yeah.
can be boring.
See, this is why art's so cool because it's
Yeah,
okay. You know,
it
like
is.
I can both say that I do not like Severance and don't find
Mhm.
it enjoyable, and also say Severance, I completely believe that it is incredible prestige TV
Right.
doing amazing things. Like both of those
Uh-huh.
things can be true.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. It's all so
so
subjective.
it's so subjective, and
Yeah.
like you can acknowledge that something is really smart and well done and just not for you.
Yeah. That's what I have been telling. I am secretly hoping that the fact that I've like reviewed books and read so many books and had the experience myself where I'm like, this should work for me, but I couldn't even tell you why it's not. I'm
Yeah.
hoping that then when I finish my book, that experience will stick with me and I'll be like,
Yeah.
remember how chill you were about it as a consumer. Like, don't take it personally. That's what my hope is, but we'll
Yeah.
see.
I'm sure it will to a certain extent, but
Yeah,
there is a mania that overtakes you with your first book.
I would imagine.
It is a psychological disorder that belongs in the DSM. I'm not joking. Like
Yeah.
it is a really unique experience. Your
Yeah.
first book, God bless. You know, that is
Yeah.
like no matter how calm, cool, collected,
Mhm.
and smart you are, it's
It's
like no, you
it's just such a
lose your
personal
marbles.
experience, I think, is
Exactly.
or it's so close to your, like, self.
It's so close to yourself.
Mhm.
It's the first one. It's you know, And
Yes.
it's like, even if you've written other books to like, and they're in your drawer or whatever,
Hmm.
if this is the book you're like going out with or hoping
Right.
people will look at, it's like everything is riding on it.
I
I,
know.
it
I
is a
was just
unique
as
experience.
a overly attuned person, I just feel like I'm gonna have lots of feelings about it.
Yep, you just have to like constantly do that boundary reminder,
Yes.
like this does
Yeah.
not reflect on me as a person. And even if it doesn't work out with this book, I have many more ideas and like I have
Hmm.
so many lives to live, you know?
Right.
Like so
Right.
many more options.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Well, thank you for talking with me so much about your
Thank
book. I
you.
loved
Thank
it
you.
so much.
Thank you for the incredible questions and
Hmm.
just like reading this book with such like generosity and such intelligence, and it's just a
Oh,
gift, seriously, to like
yeah.
be able to have these kinds of conversations.
Good.
So thank you, Kate.
You're so welcome.